The apartment was silent, yet it echoed with 1,000 unspoken screams. Lynn sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain cup that had long since lost its warmth, like her marriage. The walls around her, once painted soft peach, now seemed to close in with a sickly gray, absorbing the years of bitterness, control, and the quiet erosion of her spirit. Outside, the city buzzed in ignorant freedom, while inside, time dragged its feet like a wounded animal. Her husband, Tang, was in the bedroom, pretending to sleep off his third beer of the evening. He hadn't worked in months, claiming every job was beneath him. What he did manage to do, without fail, was to dictate Lynn's life with a tyrant's precision. From what time she could sleep to who she could talk to, from the way she dressed to how many minutes she spent in the shower. 8.5 months pregnant, swollen and exhausted, Lynn still cooked his meals, washed his socks, and endured his thunderous silence, because speaking was often worse than the silence. His words didn't hit her body, but they bruised her bones. The air in the apartment was thick with the scent of old curry and damp towels. Her back ached. Her legs trembled. But what drained her most was the constant vigilance, the need to be small, to be agreeable, to survive another day without sparking his disapproval. And as if fate was mocking her, his mother, Ba Diem, had moved in to help. Help what, exactly? Help watch Lynn like a hawk, help whisper poison into her son's ears, help reinforce the idea that Lynn was merely an incubator, a vessel, not a woman. She hadn't spoken to her own family in months. Tang said they didn't understand, that they always turned her against him. Eventually she believed him. Or, at least, she pretended to. That morning, as the first rays of light bled into the cracked kitchen window, Lynn felt a kick in her belly, sharp and defiant. A reminder that life still stirred within her. But there was no joy in that moment, only fear. Fear of what kind of world she was bringing this child into. What kind of man the baby's father was. What kind of woman she had allowed herself to become. Then came the call, Tang barking orders from the hallway. Get ready. You're going with us to the hospital. He didn't look at her. He didn't ask how she felt. He didn't notice the limp in her step or the swelling in her fingers. But she obeyed, like always. She pulled on the same faded sweater, the one that covered the bruises of 1,000 silences. She slipped on her worn-out shoes and followed them out the door, her heart pounding like a prisoner being led to sentencing. The bus stop was crowded. The morning rush clawed at her nerves. When the bus arrived, it was nearly full, and Lynn, nearly collapsing, found a seat. Just one. She sank into it like a lifeline, until Tang's voice sliced through the air. Stand up. Let my mother sit. No, please. No concern. Just expectation, entitlement, control. And she stood, of course. Slowly, shamefully, one hand bracing her lower back, the other clinging to the metal pole. Ba Diem didn't thank her. She sat with the authority of a queen, while Lynn stood like a servant who had dared to forget her place. No one said a word. Not the driver. Not the passengers. Not the young man with headphones. Not the woman scrolling her phone. And Lynn, she didn't cry.
She didn't speak.
She just clenched her teeth and looked out the window, wondering if her child would ever learn to breathe in a world where she herself had forgotten how. The bus rattled through the city like a tired beast, coughing its way past markets and concrete blocks, each jolt a reminder that comfort was reserved for someone else. Lynn gripped the cold metal rail with both hands, her body swaying as the driver jerked forward. Her feet throbbed, knees swollen, belly heavy with the life she carried. Sweat formed along her hairline, soaking into the collar of her sweater, and still, no one moved. Her husband sat stone-faced beside his mother, who adjusted her coat like royalty on a throne. They didn't look at Lynn, didn't notice the way her fingers trembled, or how her breathing grew shallow. And neither did the other passengers, not really. They glanced, yes. They registered. But then they looked away, the way people do when a building burns and they're afraid of the heat touching them too. Then, from the middle of the bus, a voice cracked the silence. Hey, are you okay? It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. Just human. A young man, maybe late 20s, leaned forward slightly, looking at Lynn. Not at her belly, not at her shoes, but at her face. She blinked, caught off guard, like someone who had forgotten she existed. "She's fine," Tang snapped, not even turning his head. His voice was sharp, dismissive. "She's pregnant, not dying. Mind your own business." The man's brows furrowed. Pregnant women are supposed to sit. Isn't that just basic decency? The bus stirred, like a ripple in still water. A woman near the front adjusted her scarf and glanced over. An elderly man lowered his newspaper. Tang stood now, his voice rising. "I said mind your own damn business. You think you know better than her husband? She's my wife." The man didn't back down. "Exactly. You're her husband. So maybe you should act like it." That hit like a slap. Not just to Tang, but to the entire bus. The silence now was no longer passive. It was electric, awkward, hungry. And somewhere in that charged air, Lynn realized people were watching. Not her pain, not her silence, but the violence wrapped in civility. The tyranny in the everyday. Tang took a step toward the man, puffed up with years of unchallenged control. "This is our family business. Keep your damn nose out of it." "No," the man said calmly. "This is a public bus. This woman is a citizen. A human being. She looks like she's about to faint, and you—" His voice cracked slightly, righteous fury bubbling beneath the surface. "You've got her standing here like a servant." Ba Diem sneered. "She's always dramatic. She just wants attention." Now it was another voice, a woman in her 40s, firm and unapologetic. "So, what if she wants attention? She's carrying a baby. If no one speaks up now, what does that make the rest of us?" More voices joined in, soft murmurs turning into a current. "Why doesn't she sit down? Give her the seat. This is disgusting. He looks healthy enough to stand. Why is his mother more important than the mother of his child?" And just like that, the mood shifted. A man near the back stood up. "Here. Sit here, miss." But Lynn didn't move. She stood frozen, chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes darting between strangers who were suddenly fighting for her. She had been invisible so long, she didn't recognize the light when it hit her. Tang reached out to grab her arm, but the young man stepped in. "Don't touch her." Their eyes locked, heat versus conviction. And then Lynn, soft-spoken, obedient Lynn, found her voice. "Don't." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Firm. Newborn. "Don't touch me." It wasn't just the words. It was the silence that followed them. It was how Tang paused, confused, not because she had said something wrong, but because she had said something at all. She turned slowly, gently pushed past him, and walked to the empty seat. The one offered freely. She sat, hands on her belly, back straight, head held high. The bus drove on, and in the glass of the window, Lynn caught her reflection, not the shadow of someone surviving, but the outline of someone waking up. The world outside moved fast, but inside that bus, something had shifted. A crack in the silence. A rupture in the old order. It wasn't a revolution. Not yet. But it was the first breath of one. The door to their apartment slammed behind them with a finality that echoed like a verdict. Lynn walked in first, silent, her steps light but deliberate, like someone walking out of a dream that had long turned into a nightmare. The hallway smelled of fish sauce and detergent, walls stained with years of cohabitation and slow erosion. It was all too familiar, too small. Behind her, Tang cursed under his breath. He tossed his keys onto the table, the sound sharp, slicing through the still air. "What the hell is that on the bus?" he barked. "Are you trying to humiliate me in front of strangers?" Lynn didn't answer. "I asked you something." His voice boomed against the old wooden cabinets, against the dirty dishes stacked like evidence of neglect. Still, silence. It unnerved him, this calm, this lack of fear. It wasn't like her. It wasn't safe. He stepped toward her, his breath sour with rage. "You think you're strong now? Just because some strangers defended you? You think that makes you right?" This time, she turned. Slowly, eyes level, No, she said, voice steady, soft like dusk. I'm not strong. Not yet. But I'm done. He laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. Done with what? Talking back? Done with your own house. This is not a house, she said. It's a place where I disappear. That stunned him. Not because it was wrong, but because it was devastatingly accurate. You're not going anywhere, he growled. You've got no job. No money. You can't survive without me. And that's when it hit her, his fear. Not of losing her, but of losing the version of her that made him feel powerful. The quiet one. The grateful one. The one who bore his cruelty, like tradition. Lynn walked to the room. Her fingers touched the closet door, brushing past cheap plastic hangers and worn-out fabric. She didn't pack. Not yet. There was nothing she needed to take, really. No piece of clothing or object that couldn't be left behind. Freedom doesn't weigh much, but it costs everything. When she reemerged, she wore only her coat and a calmness that was almost unnatural. He stood in the kitchen, jaw clenched, arms crossed, waiting for her to fold, for the performance to end. I'm going to my aunt's, she said. Tang scoffed. With what money? She looked him in the eye. I'll figure it out. Don't expect me to come crawling when you run out of places to hide. I don't want you to crawl, she said. I want you to vanish. And then she stepped out. The hallway outside smelled different. Like detergent, yes, but also like possibility. The stairwell echoed with her footsteps, each one sharper, clearer than the last. Outside, the air was cold. Not cruel, just honest. She walked past a noodle stall, past a couple arguing, past the old woman selling lottery tickets near the curb. The world hadn't changed. It was still hard, still unfair, still indifferent. But she had. She didn't cry. Not now. That would come later, maybe, when it was safe, when it was quiet. But for now, her body felt light, her breath less shallow. Her hands no longer trembled. At the next intersection, she paused. The street stretched ahead like a clean wound. People moved, cars honked, lights changed. Life was messy and loud and indifferent. But she stepped into it anyway, into the chaos, into the silence that belonged to her. Not to escape, but to begin. The room she now lived in was barely 8 square meters, an attic above her aunt's kitchen, with a single window that looked out onto a rusty water tank and tangled electrical wires. There was no air conditioner, just a creaky fan that hummed like an old prayer in summer nights. And yet, in this cramped, imperfect space, Lynn felt something she hadn't felt in years, the absence of fear. Every morning, she woke at 5. Not out of obligation or anxiety, but out of rhythm, her own rhythm. She would light the gas stove gently, mindful not to wake her aunt below. The kettle would whistle quietly, and she'd pour herself a cup of instant coffee, cheap and bitter, but hot. She liked how the steam curled around her face, like a private ritual. It reminded her she was still here. There was something holy in those minutes, a silence that didn't suffocate. She found a part-time job at a small pho stall down the street. It paid just enough to cover her food and the small contribution to her aunt. Her hands smelled of broth and fish sauce, her fingers burned red from scrubbing pots, but no one yelled at her. No one threw dishes. No one called her names like arrows. She was invisible here too, in a way, but invisibility by choice is freedom. And with freedom comes a kind of dignity that no title, no man, no polished floor could ever offer. On Sundays, she went to the river. She never spoke of it to anyone. It wasn't a place of nostalgia or peace. It was a place of reckoning. She would stand by the water's edge, watching the muddy current drag branches and styrofoam downriver. Sometimes she would bring stale bread and break it into crumbs for the fish. She didn't know why she did it, but the gesture felt like penance or prayer. One afternoon, after her shift, Lynn found herself sitting on a bench under the old tamarind tree near the market. It had shed most of its leaves, but some clung on, stubborn and curled, trembling in the breeze. She watched a little girl ride a plastic tricycle in crooked circles, laughing without fear. The sound pierced something soft in her chest. For a brief moment, Lynn closed her eyes. And there, behind her eyelids, she saw herself. Not the woman Tang shouted at. Not the girl who once flinched at footsteps. But a version of herself she barely remembered. A teenager on a rooftop, laughing into the wind. A book in her lap, the world still unruined. That girl was still somewhere inside. Bruised but breathing. Later that evening, Lynn washed her clothes by hand. She scrubbed the fabric slowly, watching the suds form and swirl. She thought of how something soiled could still be made clean, how a white shirt could return, not new, but worn in a different way, bearing the marks of survival. She hung it up to dry under a line of blinking Christmas lights her aunt had forgotten to take down. There was no soundtrack to her recovery. No montage. No sudden transformation. Only small moments. The kind no one notices. Like the way she no longer looked down when she walked. Like the way she started to hum again when folding laundry. Like the single yellow flower she picked on the way home one day. Not for anyone. Just to put in a jar on her windowsill. It wilted in 2 days. But it had been beautiful. That was enough. And then, one day, she looked in the mirror and saw a scar on her chin she hadn't noticed before. From a night long ago. It used to shame her. Now she touched it softly, almost with reverence. It was proof. Not of pain, but of resurrection. The morning was ordinary. A thin mist clung to the edges of the alleyways, and the smell of wet concrete mingled with a sharp aroma of coffee from street carts. Lynn hadn't planned to go back. It just happened, like a thought that returns without invitation, like a muscle memory. She stepped off the bus near the old block, her block, though it didn't feel like hers anymore. The sidewalk was uneven as ever, still cracked from roots pushing underneath. A man was selling phone cases where the old lottery kiosk used to be. A teenage girl in a school uniform passed by, earbuds in, eyes low. The world had gone on. Of course it had. She walked slower now. Not from fear. From clarity. From the weight of memory pressing up gently from the ground with every step. The building looked smaller than she remembered. Time does that, it shrinks the monsters once you stop running. Paint peeled along the edges of the stairwell. Someone had spray-painted a phone number in red on the wall. Need fast cash. Lynn almost smiled. Life didn't bother to be poetic. It just was. At the base of the stairs, she paused. She wasn't here to reclaim anything. Not to confront him. Not to prove herself. She had nothing to prove. But she needed to see it. To see that it hadn't changed. That she had. From somewhere above, a window slammed shut. And for a flicker of a moment, the past brushed her skin like cold air. But she didn't flinch. She didn't turn back. Instead, she crossed the alley and stood in front of the tiny tamarind tree someone had planted years ago in a cracked pot. It had grown, crooked, stubborn, with a few brown pods hanging low. She reached out and touched a branch. It swayed slightly in her hand, as if acknowledging her presence without needing to understand it. In her pocket was a small paper bag, inside, 2 steamed buns. One for her, one for her aunt. They'd share them later over hot tea and soft conversation, maybe laugh about a customer at the faux stall who couldn't pronounce "ga" correctly. Nothing grand, just life. Steady, slow, hers. She turned to leave. No dramatic exit. No backward glance. Only the echo of her footsteps, steady on concrete, carrying her forward, not as a survivor, not as a warrior, not as a symbol, but simply as Lynn. Alive.